democratic government, representative and elected by the people. Inherited a certain situation. It is not of our making. For example, most of the good farming land in the highlands was reserved originally for European farmers, so we have to bring Africans into this area. Most of commerce and trade has been monopolized by Asians, and we now have to bring Africans into this area. By the people, I include anybody who decides to make Kenya his home, in her years, who accepts to be treated as an equal citizen with everybody else.
To welcome you to the Mboya Mausoleum. My name is Paul Ndiege. Paul is one of the curators of the Mboya Mausoleum. And I'm happy that today, for most of you, as I can see, it's your first time here. Yeah. So just before us here is Tom's grave, and Tom's remains have been inside here for the past 52 years plus. This large homestead, beyond the wall, belongs to Tom's father. Tom's father was Leonardus Ndiege. So Tom was basically buried within his father's homestead. At the time of his assassination in 1969, Tom already had plans to move out and establish his own homestead as per Luo tradition. His father was working in a sisal estate in a place called Odhiambo under the colonial rule. There was a colonial settler called Macmillan. Sure, you must have seen the Macmillan Library in Nairobi. And by the age of 25 years, that was in 1955, Tom was already an international trade union leader, having joined the then International Confederation of Free Trade Unions. Here, he earned a scholarship and he ended up being a student at Oxford University, training in industrial relations, economics, and political science. While at Oxford, Tom would still continue the gospel. He'd write stories concerning the African misery, even in the papers there. And he was a bit lucky enough to have met a lifelong friend at Oxford. This was an American trade unionist named William X. Scheinman. Scheinman saw the potential in Tom, and they connected Tom to a committee in the US called American Committee on Africa, which enabled Tom to travel to the US for the first time in 1956. While in the US, he had an opportunity to meet the greats like Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy family, Harry Belafonte, Jackie Robinson, just to mention a few. So when he returned to Kenya in late 1956, Tom would continue with his trade union works. In 1957, the then colonial government agreed to opt few African politicians into the Legislative Council, and Tom became the very first one when he contested the Nairobi Central constituency, which is today Kamukunji. With others, they would form what they called African Elected Members Organization, which would be the tool that they would use in pursuit for Kenya's independence. This is even what led to the Lancaster House conferences, which backed Kenya being an internal self-government, what we today celebrate as Madaraka Day. That's 1st of June 1963. Here, Kenyatta was appointed Prime Minister, and he was allowed to form a small government and cabinet In this cabinet, Tom became the very first Kenyan Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs. And that's why Tom had a big hand in the drafting of the very first constitution. They would also come up with a national flag, which was designed by none other than Thomas Joseph Mboya, the public seal and others. So the national anthem, though it originated from the coastal region, Natukomu Lullaby, Tom had infused the lines like, "Justice be our shield and defender, may we dwell in unity, peace and..."
God of all creation, bless this our Lord and nation. Justice be our shield and defender, may we dwell in unity, peace and liberty, plenty be found within our border.
Just to make it more unifying and harmonious. So in short, we see Tom a man ahead of his time. 12th of December 1964, Kenya becomes a republic and Kenyatta becomes the president with Jaramogi the vice president. But within this cabinet and government, Tom becomes the Minister for Economic Planning and Development. He ended up writing so many policy papers, namely the Sessional Paper 10 of 1965, which is being revisited today by the Uhuru administration. In 1968, then President Jomo Kenyatta suffered heart attack and stroke. But earlier, at the constituted the 1964 cabinet and government, there was a miss already, and that's why there had been cracks in the ruling party can. He ended up out of nepotism and favoritism, maybe tribalism, settling on some figures being ministers who had no vision of one Kenya, one people, but rather the vision to ensure that they amassed as much wealth as possible and held high offices. So this brought about some acrimony. So in 1969, which was an election year, Kenyatta called a cabinet meeting in which he hinted to his cabinet that because of his poor health and age, he would no longer contest the presidency. This brought about the Kenyatta succession. So it was here that Tom had declared his candidature, and because of what he had achieved, Tom was seen as an obvious successor to the then president. But the Kenyatta inner circle would see Tom as a man who would not let them leave. They would see him as a threat because they knew that if Tom ever became the president, because it was apparent that if he contested, he would be the president, they would be exposed to justice. The ill-gotten wealth would go plus their positions, and for that, they would be exposed to justice. So they had to trim Tom to size, calling Tom names like Sungura Mjanja or the small boy. So they had options. The first option was to ensure that the flourishing Tom's connections in the trade union movement had to be cut. So they called elections in which Tom's men were removed. The second option was to do with the constitution, whereby they would ensure that an amendment was done so that for one to contest the presidency, the age that one must have attained was 42 years, just because Tom was 39. So it was very unfortunate that the amendment never went through, and it was that they had to now think of eliminating Tom through an assassination. So Tom was advised to go into exile, but he reasoned that he was on a mission and even his life could have been the price. So the last attempt that succeeded came on the 5th of July 1969. It was a bright Saturday, and Tom had worked in his office afternoon In the very afternoon, Tom, as one of the founders and the then patron of Gourmet at the club, would want to watch a football match pitting Gor against Sabalu FC at City Stadium. So Tom released all his handlers to go home refreshed so that they could meet at the City Stadium. Driving himself, Tom drove on Government Road, which is today Moy Avenue. But just because he wanted to buy some medicine from a nearby pharmacy called the Chani Pharmacy on Government Road, he parked his official car and walked in. Having a chat with the lady who owned the pharmacy, the lady would notice a smartly dressed man approaching. This was the assassin called Isaac Maash and Jenga Njoroge. So Tom was on his way out. He met Njenga, but ironically, Tom and Njenga knew each other. As Tom was the Secretary General of KANU, Njenga had been one of the powerful KANU youth wingers, and he had even benefited from Tom's generosity one time when Tom airlifted them to study in Russia's police service. So Tom informed Njenga that he was aware Njenga had been sent to kill him, and if killing him make Kenya a better nation, so be it. So Njenga went ahead and shot him twice. Yeah, he landed onto the ground and the lady responded immediately. But after a few minutes, an ambulance arrived with a very top doctor from Nairobi Hospital. It was later learned that the doctor's mission was to ensure that Tom was dead, even before he was taken to the hospital. So it happened so. So with the news, there erupted a lot of chaos, protests, and demonstrations. And for that, Tom had to be buried as quickly as possible so that normalcy would return. By the 9th of the same month, Tom's body arrived in Homa Bay. There's a big Catholic church, St. Paul's, where the body lay overnight. The following day, 10th, the body arrived here and lay overnight. Then on the 11th of the same month, the burial was conducted here. 2 years later, Tom's many friends and the family came together and built the memorial, the Mausoleum. So because Tom was killed by the bullet, the main building was designed in the shape of the bullet, just to remind us of Tom's assassination. Right on that door is an inversion of a coffin shape on either side and the cross. So right in the hall today, we'll see just few of Tom's collections in terms of mementos, awards, honors, and naming. Tom had a family. Tom's wife was called Ambassador Pamela Mboya. So the man who shot Tom, Isaac Maash and Jenga, was apprehended and presented before the courts of law. But Njenga ended up saying that he was sent by a big man to kill Mr. Mboya, and for that it was the big man who should have accounted for the same. The big man remains a mystery. So the story rather starts or ends here because you're aware that anything before the courts of law, we are prohibited from any speculation. So allow me to end my narration there.